In 1956, Mao Zedong personally named China's first truck Liberation. It was a clunky 4-ton copy of a Soviet design. Nobody outside China cared. Nobody was afraid. But something started that day that America completely missed, because 70 years later, Chinese trucks now operate in over 120 countries, and America's most legendary brands are watching markets they owned for decades disappear forever. The takeover wasn't loud. There was no trade war, no political battle, no announcement. It was priced at $20,000 and serviced overnight. In 2025 alone, China exported a record 330,000 heavy trucks, more than any nation in history. And the markets that Kenworth, Peterbilt, and Freightliner once owned without question, they are now Chinese territory. So how did this happen, and why did nobody stop it? That story starts in Portland, Oregon in 1929. In 1929, a freight entrepreneur named Leland James founded Consolidated Freightways in Portland, Oregon, and set in motion 6 decades of American trucking dominance. Kenworth, Peterbilt, Freightliner. These names didn't just dominate America, they dominated every continent that mattered. When a construction company in Africa needed heavy trucks, they thought American. When a logging operation in Southeast Asia needed hauling power, they thought American. The premium price was worth it. Because the trucks lasted. By the 1980s, American and European brands controlled over 90% of global heavy truck exports. Chinese trucks didn't even register as competition. But here's the mistake that changed everything. American brands focused on high-margin markets, North America, Europe, Australia. They didn't chase Africa. They didn't chase Central Asia. They didn't chase Southeast Asia. Too poor, too difficult, too risky. That decision would eventually cost them everything. Because while America looked away, a factory in Shandong province was quietly getting started. In 1935, a small factory opened in Shandong province. Nobody outside China noticed. Nobody cared. After the Communist Revolution, Mao's government built the first automobile works in Changchun in 1953. 3 years later, the first Jiefeng CA-10 truck rolled off the assembly line. A 4-ton copy of a Soviet design. Crude, underpowered, decades behind Western trucks. But Mao named it Liberation. China could finally build a truck. In 1960, the Jinan factory unveiled China's first heavy-duty truck, 8 tons. But by Western standards, these machines were still embarrassingly primitive. For 2 decades, the gap between a Jinan workshop and a Kenworth assembly line seemed completely unbridgeable. Western manufacturers looked at China and laughed. That laughter would become the most expensive mistake in trucking history. Because in 1983, China made a deal that changed everything. In 1983, China made a decision that Austria would later deeply regret. CNHTC, the successor to the Jinan plant, signed a technology transfer agreement with Austria's Steyr. On paper, it looked simple. China was buying European trucks, but that was never the real plan. Between 1988 and 1991, China purchased 1,100 complete Steyr trucks and assembled 996 additional knockdown kits. Every truck was studied, every component was measured, every manufacturing process was documented. China wasn't buying trucks, it was buying a future. The technology gap that had seemed unbridgeable for decades was now shrinking rapidly. Austria thought it was making a sale. China knew it was stealing a playbook. And every Sinotruk, every Schachmann, every FAW truck that would later flood global markets traces its DNA directly back to this single Austrian deal. The technology was ready. But now China needed to prove something even harder, that buyers outside China would actually trust them. In 1994, one man decided to find out. In 1994, a South African entrepreneur named Richard Leiter did something everyone called completely insane. He introduced FAW Chinese trucks to South Africa, an unknown brand in a country where German, Japanese, and American names commanded instant trust. Nobody believed it would last, but Leiter understood something the industry had missed. Construction companies didn't need premium badges. They needed trucks that worked at a price they could afford. He built a service network from scratch, trained local mechanics, stocked spare parts. By the late 1990s, FAW trucks were a legitimate presence across South Africa. But here's what nobody realized at the time. Leader hadn't just sold trucks. He had written the playbook for Chinese global expansion. Cheap trucks, local service, parts on the shelf, mechanics who knew the machines. South Africa proved the concept. Now China needed a truck worthy of conquering the world. On October 18, 2004, the first Sinotruck HOWO truck rolled off the assembly line in Jinan, and the global trucking industry would never be the same. The price in African and Southeast Asian markets? $15,000 to $30,000. A comparable Volvo, Scania, or Mercedes. $100,000 to $150,000. For buyers hauling gravel across sub-Saharan roads, that price gap wasn't a footnote. It was the entire decision. Western manufacturers dismissed the HOWO as a cheap knockoff. They assumed buyers would return to premium brands once they could afford them. They were completely wrong. Buyers who started with HOWO stayed with HOWO. Good enough, cheap enough, fixable enough. And good enough was all the market needed. But China's ambitions went far beyond selling trucks. On September 7, 2013, President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion infrastructure program spanning over 150 countries. Roads, bridges, railways, ports, all financed by Chinese banks. And every construction site needed one thing above everything else: trucks. When China financed a road in Kenya, Chinese trucks hauled the gravel. When China built a port in Pakistan, Chinese trucks moved the containers. The trucks followed the money. And the money was everywhere. Western brands focused on geopolitics. China focused on logistics. And logistics won. BRI wasn't just an infrastructure program. It was a truck distribution strategy disguised as foreign policy. The doors were now wide open, and China's next move was even smarter. Exporting trucks is one strategy. Building them inside the country is domination. FAW opened an assembly plant in South Africa's Coega Special Economic Zone. Sinotruck opened a full assembly plant in Tarlac, Philippines. FAW created 8 wholly owned subsidiaries across Uzbekistan, Indonesia, and Mexico. China wasn't just selling to these markets, it was becoming part of them. Local assembly means local jobs, local supply chains, local pride. When a truck is built by South African workers, it stops feeling foreign. It becomes part of the economy. Governments that might have resisted Chinese imports instead welcomed Chinese investment. Western brands sent invoices, China sent factories, and factories create something invoices never can: loyalty. But even this wasn't China's most powerful weapon, because the next revolution was about to make Western trucks look not just expensive, but completely outdated. While Western manufacturers were still debating the electric transition, China was already building it. By 2022, China held over 81% of the global zero-emission commercial truck market. By end of 2025, electric trucks represented 46% of all new truck sales inside China. Western brands assumed their engineering advantage would return once the market shifted to electric. But China didn't wait for the shift. China created it. China controls 80% of the world's EV batteries, the charging networks, the technicians, the entire supply chain. The electric truck market isn't a level playing field, it is a Chinese playing field, and everyone else is asking for permission to compete. In 2025, China's heavy truck export machine hit a number that shocked the entire industry: 330,000 units, a record never achieved by any nation in history. 289,000 shipped in just the first 10 months. Africa exports surged 54.1%. In October 2025 alone, one single month produced 37,000 exported trucks. Sinotruck alone shipped over 150,000 units. FAW achieved 18% market share in South Africa with 31.9% annual growth. Outselling Toyota, Daimler, Isuzu, all of them. Africa, 85% Chinese market share. Southeast Asia, Chinese trucks dominating. Central Asia, BRI. Corridors running entirely on Chinese wheels. The markets America once owned without contest are now, statistically and commercially, Chinese territory. The takeover was never loud. Just $20,000 trucks and relentless expansion into markets Western brands called too difficult. As of March 2026, Chinese truck brands operate in over 120 countries, not just exporting, embedded, inside local economies, inside local supply chains. So can the West ever recover these markets? The honest answer is probably not. The price gap is structural. Chinese manufacturing costs are fundamentally lower. The service networks are established. Local mechanics know Chinese trucks, not Western ones. The relationships are built. Governments that welcomed Chinese investment won't easily switch. To compete on price, Western brands would need to slash margins or move production. Neither is happening quickly. To compete on electric, they would need to challenge Chinese battery dominance, a supply chain China spent 20 years building. Western brands will keep North America, Europe, and Australia. But the high-volume, high-growth markets of the developing world, those are Chinese. And they are not coming back. China didn't win these markets with superior engineering. China won them by simply showing up. In markets America called too poor, too difficult, too risky, China built service networks, trained mechanics, followed its own money. America didn't lose these markets to competition. America abandoned them. And abandoned markets don't wait. They find someone else. Right now, on roads across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia, millions of trucks are moving goods and building economies. Most of them say Sinotruk, Shackman, or FAW on the grill. Not Kenworth, not Peterbilt, not Freightliner. The takeover was priced at $20,000. Serviced overnight, completed in silence. From Portland, Oregon in 1929 to 330,000 exports in 2025. America built the trucking world. China took it. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. Now tell me in the comments, is this takeover permanent, or can the West still fight back?